Fantastic. Well, thank you, Julie, and My Jewish Learning for setting this up and again welcoming me back. I really look forward to all of these when I do them. And it's nice to know I haven't screwed up badly enough that they've stopped asking me to come back. So every time is a renewal that I've done something right. Today is Parashat Noach, and also a big shout out to those of you who are regulars. For those of you who are not regulars or who are regulars but have somehow missed me, I'm super excited to have you here. And what those who have seen me before will know about me at this point is that I really like to get into what's actually happening in the Parsha. That's really where I like to dive in and really absorb the pshat. And today is extra exciting for me, I have to admit, because we're going to talk a bit about the Jewish calendar. And this is a class I just got finished teaching. It's super an exciting topic for me. Big calendar nerd over here. And this Parsha does a lot of cool things with it that you probably didn't even really know it did. So let's dive in. Let's see. Here's my screen share. Let me get you guys aside so I can see everybody while I'm doing this. Pull up my chat box. Make this a little bit bigger here. And we'll dive right in. Parashat Noach, one of the only Parsha names that everyone actually spells correctly in the transliteration. It's very exciting. But let's first talk about where we are in Torah. How do we get to Parashat Noach? Well, this one's easy this week because, well, we're almost in the very beginning. We're only one Parsha away from the very start of all of Torah because, well, it's that time of year. So recap so far. Creation has happened. Yay, we exist. Adam and Eve had Cain. He killed his brother Abel. Adam and Eve had another child. That guy's name was Seth. I hope you know about Seth. If not, should have come last week. Hopefully they talked about Seth. Seth is a cool guy because Seth is actually the ancestor of Noah. That's how we get to Noah from Torah. And then right before our Parsha begins, God looks around at people and says, wow, these people that I created, they kind of suck. I'm going to start over. People are only going to live to 108, to the age of 120. Caps people says, we're going to redo this. And then we get to Parashat Noach, which begins in chapter 6 of the book of Genesis. I believe it starts verse 9. And in verse 13, just a couple verses in, God sets the scene. God says, Vayomer Elohim leNoach, Kates kol basar haba lefanai, ki mal'ah haaretz chamas mipneihem. God says to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all of flesh, for the earth is filled with wickedness, So God's going to get rid of the planet, or not the planet, but all the people that are currently there. Now, this might not be news to many of you yet. If it is, strap in, because we're going to get even more exciting than that. But in order to save Noach is going to get special dispensation from God, Noah, and Noah's family. Just a couple verses in, this is why Noach gets the warning. And God says, Noach, you're going to build a giant boat because the way that I'm going to destroy everything is with a flood. And what should that boat be? It shall be 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits. What is a cubit, you might be asking? Fantastic question. Right? So about the scholars agree that essentially a cubit is a measurement that was probably somewhere like fingertip to elbow, but like I'm 5'3". It probably wasn't my fingertip to elbow. So like, what exactly is a cubit? Unsure, but we'll call it about 1.5 feet, maybe somewhere in that range. And so you can really kind of get the scale of this, that we're talking like 450 feet long, right? Like 100 feet tall, or 75 feet tall, or wide, excuse me, and then about 45 feet tall, which makes sense because there's going to be 3 levels to it, and figure a standard building level is about 10 to 12 feet, 8 to 12 feet, somewhere in that range. So really, 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 really big boat. That's actually not what we're gonna, so like the size of an ocean going ship. Yeah, most likely. I don't really know offhand exactly how big those are, but yeah, a boat that can handle the ocean. Definitely not a dinghy here. We're definitely not going for a small, just barely scrape by, because not only does Noah have to be in this boat, but his wife, his sons, their wives, and then 2 to 7 of every pairs of every animal that he can get his hands on. Now, we could actually spend an entire hour or 5 hours talking just about those animals. That's not what I'm going to do today. So for today, we're going to just have to hold on to the notion that Noah's carrying the animals. They're going to repopulate the earth after the flood. We're good to go. For many of you, that part of the story, again, is not super new. And that's okay. Now, this idea of 7 might be new. The idea is the Torah tells us that there are 7 pairs of all of the tahor animals, the clean animals, the animals for sacrifice and food. Somebody wrote, why not plants? Great question. Maybe God is going to handle the plants God's self after the flood. Our Torah doesn't tell us. But surely the plants survive. Well, actually, he must bring on some plants because Noah has to bring on the food for all of the animals, which means the herbivores need some plants. So maybe there are plants. Maybe we just don't hear about them. That's an interesting thought too. So somebody asked a really great question from our commentators. How did Noach know which animals were clean, which animals were tahor? Since the laws didn't exist yet, we don't mean kosher. Let's be very clear about that. Despite what some of our sages want you to believe, we don't mean kosher. It meant something else, something that Noah did know. I can't tell you which animals were tahor. I can just tell you that Noah knew some of them were. All right. But again, we could spend 5 hours on that. We're not going to dive into that. What I want to do is look at a timeline of the story. A timeline of the story. Because this Parsha gives us a lot of dates and times. And when we get numbers thrown at us in Torah, it's very easy to ignore them. It's very easy to brush them aside and be like, okay, dates, times, ages, I get it, whatever. We got some numbers. Let's move on. What's the meat of the story? But something really cool happens when you actually stop and look at the timeline. So what happens? Noah was 600 years old when the flood came. Again, we could spend a lot of time just talking about his age. We're not going to deal with that. Noah was 600 years old. At some point in the story, God gives did I just say Did I say Moses? Sometimes I do that by accident. Sorry, Noah. Noah was 600 years old. We just got finished talking about Moses for like 7 months. So, it's on my mind. But Noah is 600 years old. And at some point, God gives Noah a 7-day warning. Says 7 days from now, the flood is going to come. And sure enough, in verse 10, and on that 7th day that God warned, the floods actually come. What was that day? Bishnat shesh me'ot shana lechaye Noach b'chodesh hasheni. So in the 600th year of Noah's life, i.e. he's 600 years old, in the 2nd month, b'shiva asar yom lachodesh, in the 17th day of the month, which means Noah was warned on the 2nd month on the 10th day. 7 days later, or in the 2nd month on the 17th day of the month, that's when the flood begins. Okay. If you're not able to follow all of these numbers as I'm reading the text, don't worry, I've got a helpful chart at the end. The rain then falls, we learn, for 40 days and 40 nights. And that same day, Noach, Shem, Ham, Yafet, his wife, their wives, all the animals, everybody goes on the ark the day that the rains fall. Our Torah is very clear about that. So day 1 is the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month. And again, the Torah reiterates in verse 17, Vayehi hamabu arba'im yom. It lasts for 40 days. Now, this is where we start to deviate from the myth of the Noah story that you may have been taught in Hebrew school as a child. We're taught, most of us at least, if your education was anything like mine, that there was a 40-day flood, zeo, and that's the end of the story. 40-day flood. The rains came for 40 days. The waters rose for 40 days. But in fact, in verse 24, we learn, Vayigbiru hamayim al haaretz Chamishimu me'at yom. Another 150 days of the waters being high. And this makes sense if we think about the physics of water. If you pour too much water in your bathtub and then unplug the drain, it doesn't instantly vanish. It takes time to go down. And usually when it's full, it holds on to that water a little bit. It looks like it's going down slower. And then at the end, it looks like it's going down faster. It's not really, it's just sort of the quantity piece of it. And we've got some lovely midrashim going in our chat here with the numbers 500 and 300 and the giant og and great midrashim. I'm not going to focus on midrashim today. We're going to look at the actual Torah here and then later some Talmud because I really want us to understand what the Torah is actually telling us, literally telling us. So 150 days. Now here's where we get weird. The Torah in chapter 8, verse 4, makes a comment about the 17th day of the 7th month. On the 7th month, in the 17th day of that month, the ark comes to a rest. Now we learned that the waters got high enough, and in fact, maybe I'm going to draw a picture of this. Let's see if I can draw a picture so we can really kind of visualize what's going on here. Oh, I can't do a whiteboard. Never mind. I won't draw a picture. We'll go back here. I'll draw a picture here. So we've got our mountain and we've got the waters. Our Torah tells us they get so high that they're 15 cubits above the highest mountain. So the boat has got to be hanging out up here. My super artistic, perfect drawing of a boat. I know you guys are in awe of my artistic abilities. I get it. At some point in the 7th month, 17th day of the 7th month, the waters have to be low enough, not that the mountains are seen yet, but that the bottom of the boat rests on the mountain. That's important because we can't actually see the mountain yet, and yet the boat stops on Ararat. So the boat has hit land, but the waters are still above the mountaintops. Okay. Then what happens? Oops, let me go back to my chat here. And Julie, thank you. She just posted the source sheet for anybody who wants it in the chat. You can download that as well. What happens? We're told a date. V'hamayim hayu haloch v'chasor ad hachodesh ha'asiri. In the 10th month, on the 1st of the month, the tops of the mountains become visible, i.e., that's that point in that bathtub diminishing moment where you go, oh, I can really tell the waters are going down. You can start seeing the dry land. You can start seeing the tops of the mountains. Now, that's going to be really important because before we got 150 days of water being sort of this just sitting there kind of moment, and then we don't have a timeline, we have a date, the 10th month on the 1st day of the month. So we're going to come back to that information later. 40 days after that, Noah opens the window and has the famous scene of sending out the dove. Well, he actually sends out a raven and a dove. We're not really sure from Torah what the raven was all about. Our midrashim, our sages have a lot to say about that raven and why the raven wasn't sufficient and why Moshe had to, why Noach had to send out a dove. But again, not going to go down that route today, but there's some good stuff out there on that. The dove gets sent out, returns with absolutely nothing. Noah says, okay, we're not quite ready. It's just the tops of mountains. There's nothing special out there yet. We're gonna hang out here. Wait 7 days, sends the dove out again. Clearly the water is going down enough that when Noah looks out, he sees that there's been enough of a change to then try the dove again. Somebody wrote, I think the raven just said to itself, I'm not getting back on the boat. I'll land on a mountaintop and wait. Very possible. Those persnickety ravens. Edgar Allan Poe fans abound. But nevertheless, Noah waits another 7 days, sends out the dove again. This time, the dove comes back famously with an olive branch in his mouth. Noah realizes, okay, the plant life is surviving. Thank you, Gabriel, for the nevermore. The plant life is remaining, right? The olive tree is there. He's got an olive branch. We might be good. He waits another 7 days, sends out the dove again. So now we've got 40 days past the mountaintops plus 14 for the doves. We have got the dove does not come back, i.e. the dove was able to actually survive out of the ark. So Noah now knows we're getting close to the end, but doesn't actually leave yet. That's not the end of the story. Because it wasn't until the 601st year of Noah's life, in the first month, on the first of the month, that the waters begin to dry. Now, our commentaries are going to explain here that what we mean by the earth drying is not that the earth is dry, but that the ground is wet, but you can't see the water. The water is not flooded anymore. So we can imagine the muddiness that is going to come a few days after a tremendous rain. So the water is visually gone, but still very much soaking in the earth. And so they still stay on the boat. It is not until another month and 27 days later, in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, that the earth is finally dry enough that, that Noah and his family and all the animals leave the boat. So if we remember from the beginning, that it was 1 year and 10 days on the boat. We started in the second month on the 17th day and went to the second month on the 27th day. A year and 10 days. Now, if that does not give us a different perspective than the 40-day flood, whew, I don't know what will. That is a tremendous feat that Noach accomplished, of course, with God's help. Somebody asked, who's tracking the time? Well, clearly, at the very least, God is tracking time. But I love that question because we're actually going to ask that question ourselves at the end of this. But before we ask that question, I want us to understand how cool these numbers are. Because you probably missed, while reading it in text, all of the nuance of what was going on. And in fact, when we think about the sages and the Torah, good at math, accurate numbers is not exactly the thing that we are best known for. I will admit that. I will, with no disrespect to any of my amazing rabbinic colleagues, many of them, math is not exactly their strong suit. And I think that's been the case for a few thousand years. And that's okay. But in this case, something really cool happens. But to understand it, we have to first understand the calendar. Our sages want us to look at the story of Noach based on our modern Jewish calendar. Now, it is absolutely impossible that Noach would have used the modern Jewish calendar. That was created, that was finished in the 4th century CE. So we're talking about like thousands of years later than the story of Noah. But the principles hold the same because it's based on a lunar calendar. It's based on a mix of the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. And with a lunar calendar, a purely lunar calendar, we would alternate our month days, 30 days in a month, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29. In order to account for the seasons, the seasonal shift, our rabbis did something very cool. And in the month of Cheshvan and Kislev, in months 8 and 9 of the calendar, sometimes we have 29 days, sometimes we have 30 days, and then we have an entire leap month on certain years where we add an entire month. This is when Purim gets thrown into the end as well. A bunch of stuff. Basically, there's a wide variation in the calendar here. And that's important because there is no way that this calendar would have been known by Noah. I want to be very, very clear about that. Despite what our rabbis are going to try to say in our Talmud that we're going to look at in a little bit, this could not have been the calendar that Noah was using. However, within this calendar, on some years that are not leap years, well, so hold on to that question that just came in the chat. Some years, if we get rid of the leap year, which is 12 years out of every 19, there's no leap year. And on no leap years, that's guaranteed to be 29 days. And some of those non-leap years, Cheshvan will be 29 days and Kislev will be 30 days. And what this will look like is a perfectly lunar calendar, which we can see here. So a purely lunar calendar does happen within the Jewish calendar on some years. And on those years, this is what a lunar calendar looks like. So up top, I've got the month numbers. And these names, which obviously came later, are kind of superimposed here. But you can see we're alternating 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29, etc. It is very possible, not necessarily true, but possible and likely that Noah would have used a lunar calendar in so much as you can see the moon. That idea of looking out and seeing the moon, it's in fact, it's where we get the word, the Hebrew word for the month is chodesh, which is the root chadash, which means new, i.e. a new moon. So I'm gonna, for the sake of argument, use our month dates in our calculations here, our modern day month names, but knowing that we're looking at it as though it is a perfect lunar calendar, not one of our fancy leap year modern day versions. And if we do that, then what we get is that the very first day of counting is going to be the 17th of ER, ER being the second month of the calendar. That's going to be day 1. And that's when the floods begin. Now, Noah gets the warning 7 days earlier, so I've got a little -7 there on the 10th of ER, but the 17th of ER. So if we keep going forward, then what do we learn? The rains fall for 40 days. We get to the 28th of Sivan. The 28th of Sivan, 40 days in. So far, we're okay. Let's keep it moving. And then we get this fun date of 150 days later. Well, if we do the math on that, if we start counting up in our lunar calendar, we end up at the 1st of Kislev. 190 days later is how long it takes for the waters to remain high enough that we still can't see anything visually other than water. Now that's cool because the next number we get is month 7, day 17, which is actually only 107 days in. Right? We went backwards in time here a little bit. Now that's actually not unusual in Torah because Torah very often will give you a general and then zoom in. And this is where we get our understanding of that drawing that I did earlier, where the boat lowers enough that it hits the mountain. 107 days into that 150 days of looking out, the waters had receded enough for the boat to hit land without being able to see the land. And for the remainder of that 150 days, you still can't see the tops of the mountains. Somebody asked in the chat here, when does the leap month occur? It is not as regular as every 4 years. It's actually on a 19-year cycle. It happens 7 times out of every 19 years. It's like year 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 16, and 19, I believe, something like that. But yeah, it's not thing. I teach a class on the calendar, by the way, if you're interested. Email me later. We can talk more about it. But here's where it gets cool. I said if we count 150 days based on a lunar calendar, we would end at the 1st of Kislev. Well, here's the neat part. Oh, wait, hold on. Give me 1 second. I just want to check something. I think I may have counted wrong, guys. I apologize. I think I did this wrong. Hold on. We said the Torah gives us in our next description, month 10, day 1, and I labeled it as the first of Kislev. That's actually not true. The 10th month is actually Tevet. So I apologize. Your source sheets are wrong. I just realized I counted that wrong, which is not. Oh man, I think I did this wrong. But hold on, I'm pretty sure we want it to be. I'm going to erase this one. We're not sure what's going on there. We're going to erase that one. I apologize, guys. I just realized my math was slightly wrong on that one, but it's okay. It's not going to affect our total math here. Because we've got that 28th of Sivan takes us up to, no, it is the first of Kislev. I'm going to go with what I wrote here. We can check myself later. The first of Kislev, we're going to match up with that 150 days. 40 days after that, we get the 10th of Tevet, or which would really be the 11th of Tevet. We keep going. Eventually, it doesn't actually really matter if these dates are wrong, because eventually we're going in my source sheet. So I apologize. I think I did have a slight off there on Tevet here instead of Kislev, which means these would be the month after. But none of that's relevant because these are just dates, or just numbers of days later, because eventually we get year 601, month 1, day 1. We get a set date, which is not really 64 days later. That's going to be a slightly different number. Totally apologize, guys, that I just realized my math mistake on my calendaring here. But here we end up on month 1, day 1, which is 308 days later than 308 days later. Yes, 308 days later than where we began. Now, here's where it gets really cool. According to, again, the same lunar calendar, day 2, month 2, day 27 is exactly 365 days on the ark. One lunar year, somebody wrote, no worries. Thank you. I appreciate the no worries. 365, on this 365th day, Noah leaves the ark. A lunar year, we said earlier, was 354 days, plus 10 days gives us 364 days on the ark, and then Noah gets off. So Noah spends one full solar year on the ark. Now, that's awesome in and of itself. If you're like me and yes, correct. It would remain that date later in my document. Yes. But I'll revisit that and make sure that my numbers are right. Either way, this number I know is right. These numbers have been quadruple and like quintuple checked because they're super, super, super cool. So 365 days, 364 days really, because we kind of counted the first of Kislev twice there. I will send out a corrected timeline. I will send that out to My Jewish Learning to be able to kind of have that posted there. Absolutely, I will do that for you. But never, if the timeline is still right, by the way, it's just that the name of these months might have been slightly off. But the number of elapsed days is still very much accurate here. And we end up with one full solar year. Now, why that's cool is because our rabbis, I mean, in addition to the fact that that's just really cool that our numbers actually worked out in a really neat way, and matched a lunar calendar, which is very plausibly what Noah would have been using, our sages are going to take that information and do something very, very, very cool with it, which is that they're going to acknowledge that in our calendar, I think I wrote it up here, yeah, in our modern day Jewish calendar, we have to account for both the lunar year and the solar year. Right? That's a necessity in order to make sure that Passover ends up in the spring every single year. And that's how our calendar was designed. And the first time that our sages are going to notice this combination of lunar and solar years is right here in Parashat Noach. And so it's taught. We are in the Masechet Rosh Hashanah 11b, page 11b in the Talmud. It is taught in a Baraita in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month. On that day, all of the fountains of the deep were broken open, and the windows of heaven were open. And Rabbi Yehoshua, so we're talking about that very first day of the flood, Rabbi Yehoshua looks at that day and says, like we just did, that was the 17th of Iyar, the second month, Iyar, on the 17th day, which is the day that the constellation of Kima, which I believe is the constellation Pleiades, sets during the day, and the season that the spring diminishes with the increased heat. He's just using some fancy language to tell you what time of year we're in. But he says that's the second day of the month, right? We all said that. We said the second day. We played that game. That was our first thought. And yet, Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, that wasn't the second day, the second month Iyar. That was the second month if we start counting from Tishrei, meaning it's Cheshvan. That's the month after Cheshvan that we started. It wasn't Iyar, it was Cheshvan, totally different part of the year. That's actually kind of where we are now. So we could try to prove this. We could try to figure out, well, who's right? Couldn't we just do the math again? Couldn't we just count and say, well, hold on, if it was the 17th of Iyar, shouldn't we get a different number of days than if we started in a different part of the calendar? Well, no. Because a lunar calendar, remember, a purely lunar calendar, alternates 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29. And both Nisan and Tishrei are 30-day months, which means both Iyar and Cheshvan are 29-day months, which means no matter which of those months we start in, our math is going to add up to the same 364 days on the boat, which is kind of cool. So they've got this disagreement, and there's absolutely no way to see which one of them is right, which means our Talmud is going to do something that it loves to do, which is try to make them both right. And in fact, does just that. Tanu Rabbanan, Chochmei Yisrael monin lamabul kerebi Eliezer. The sages taught that the years from creation and the flood go in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says the year starts in Tishrei, i.e., we change over from 5782 to 5783 in the month of Tishrei because of Rabbi Eliezer's interpretation of when the flood began. How cool is that? And yet, we can't discount Rabbi Yehoshua. He's equally brilliant. And in fact, he did the thing that we wanted to do. And so the cycles of the sun and the moon are in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, i.e., the spring month is Nisan. Month one of our calendar, according to the seasons, according to the solar calendar, is Nisan because of Rabbi Yehoshua's opinion on Parashat Noach. And in fact, this is the reality that we have. We celebrate Pesach in a month that we know is the spring, that we know is the first month of the solar year, that we call Nisan. And yet we change over our calendar, we change over our year in a month that we call Tishrei, according to exactly this interpretation on Parashat Noach. Joel asked a great question. Did it take a whole year to kill all the wicked people? Was that overkill? Well, we have to imagine at the very least we needed to get the waters high enough so that the tops of the mountains were covered so that no one could hide. So if the waters had to get over the mountaintops, then it's just going to take that amount of time to for those waters to go down. Water simply goes down quickly. Now, could God have zapped away all of the water instantly? I mean, in theory, but that's not what God does. God lets it go down normally. And so that's how long it took. But that's not the end of the cool bit. That's not the end of the cool bit. I mentioned in a previous teaching, I brought up the sage, one of our sages, one of our commentators, Ibn Ezra. And there was a big fan in the room. I don't remember who that was, so I don't remember if you're here or not, but I hope you are. There was a big fan of Ibn Ezra in the room, and I mentioned Ibn Ezra. So I figured I'd bring in Ibn Ezra today because Ibn Ezra points out something really cool that we kind of glossed over, which is that we were all assuming a lunar calendar, and our sages were assuming a lunar calendar because we want it to match our calendar. We wanted to. But Ibn Ezra points out something interesting. He says, those who insist that Noach used a lunar calendar because scripture tells us he spent 364 days, a year and 10 days, i.e. specifically 1 year and 10 days. We did the math to get 364, a year and 10 days in the ark. And the 10 days is the excess of the solar over a lunar. So those people who are arguing what we just said, it was a lunar year plus 10 days, are just making a point. They're just insisting on a lunar calendar for the sake of insisting a lunar calendar. They just want it to look pretty. Now, this is actually not a crazy accusation for Ibn Ezra to make, because during the time of the Talmud, there actually was a debate going on amongst the rabbis about the calendar and which calendar we should be using and how it should work and whether we can do math or have to look at the moon. It's a whole big thing. But what Ibn Ezra points out is that well, he says something that's actually mathematically wrong here, is he suggests that it had to be not a true lunar year. It had to be one of our fancy modern years. That's actually not accurate. I don't have time to go into why that's not accurate, but we did the math earlier to show that that's not necessarily accurate. But he says something brilliant. He says there's no reason to assume that Noah spent a year in the ark, one exact year in the ark, one solar year. He could have been there for one solar year plus 10 days. I.e., if we say that he started on the second month of the 17th day, and he ended in the second month of the 17th day, then that's just 1 year plus 10 days. It only matches a solar calendar if we assume that was a lunar year plus 10 days. We could have easily said January 1st to January 1st is one full year. January 1st to January 10th is one full solar year plus 10 days. Maybe it was 375 days instead of 365. And I want to posit something even crazier. Because if we go back to our text, and to not make us nauseous, I'll stop my screen share while I scroll all the way back to the beginning. We have something that shows up in the end of our text, which is, it says in chapter 8, verse 13, in the 601st year, which is when the waters start drying, in the 601st year. But we know that this is not year 601 since creation, because Noah's not the first guy. Where we started in chapter 7, verse 11, was in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the second month in the 17th day. So I was born on May 23rd. We could say that I was born in the 5th month according to the Gregorian calendar. We could also say that the second month of my life begins June 23rd. We could have a calendar based on Noah's life. And so if that's the case, then 1 year of Noah's life from the year 600 to 601 could use any calendar. It could use a solar calendar. It could use a lunar calendar. It could use an Egyptian calendar. It could use a Babylonian calendar. It could use literally any calendar. In which case, we would have absolutely no idea how many actual 24-hour days took place in that year and 10 days. Kind of crazy. And Ibn Ezra brilliantly The scientist that he was points that out. He doesn't point out the birthday bit. He points out it could just easily be a solar calendar, but that same thing follows. Which means if we want to assume a lunar calendar, like our rabbis do, we get a beautiful understanding of our modern system. And we get this lovely linear lineup that allows the sages later on to calculate why we're in year 5783, and everything lines up nicely in our tradition, and we're wonderful. And I am not nearly wise enough to contradict the wisdom of the rabbis and tell them that they were wrong. So we'll assume that they were right, and they had more reasons that we don't know about to know why they're right, and they could have proven it to all of us. And we'll give them that credit. But when we study the Parsha, and we look at these numbers, we have to acknowledge at least the brilliance of commentators like Ibn Ezra and acknowledge that there might be more to the story here. So those of you that have learned with me before, as I'm nearing the end of my non-Q&A portion of the moment, also know that I like to end everything with a question of, why do we care? Why should we care? Oh, look at that. I actually didn't even have to go back in my slides. It was right there. Oh, well. Why should we care? Other than the fact that the calendar is awesome, which hopefully I've expressed to you, and you've now gained an appreciation for how awesome the calendar is. But despite the fact that, other than the calendar being awesome, how is having this information going to radically change our lives for the better? Because isn't that, at the end of the day, kind of the point of Torah, to lead us toward a better life? So why did I just spend 45 minutes of your time looking at numbers in Noach and various interpretations that we may or may not even understand in the beginning, in the first place? Is knowing this going to fundamentally change your life? No. But it does something else instead that might. The first being that our Torah gives us these numbers. Torah, we call Torah because that word means teaching. And any good teaching doesn't have extra things that are irrelevant. Our teaching, our history book, highlights these numbers for a reason, to impart to us the understanding that the details of our history matter. They let us sit in Noah's shoes. They let us imagine the timeline of our own lives. What would it be like for you to imagine yourself for a year and 10 days of your life, however you calculate that, on a boat? And how does that change from when we just learn a glossary view of Noach and say, oh yeah, there was a flood for 40 days and then he got off the boat? By giving us this detail, it allows us extra insights into putting ourselves in that position and opening up ourselves to the rest of the details that we might have overlooked. Even more than that is that when we study Torah with nuance, when we actually look at the pshat, that simple, contextual understanding of what's happening, and we come to our own conclusions, even if our rabbis later prove us to be our first thoughts to be wrong, and they're brilliant and they show us something we never saw. By doing that, it gives us A, a deeper appreciation of the text itself, and B, it prepares us to study our sages. It prepares us to look at what they're saying with an understanding that we wouldn't have had if we didn't prepare in the same way that they prepared. When our sages wrote the Mishnah and the Talmud and their books of halakha, they understood the pshat. They wrestled with it. So to understand how they get where they get, we have to wrestle with it too. And that's what I love about Parashat Noach, is that it gives us so much detail that is so easy to overlook in our own lives, and yet we have volumes of books that fill my shelf that would not be there without that nuance, without our sages poring over them. And in fact, our modern day calendar evolves from rabbinic understanding of these numbers. How cool is that? I'm going to pause now for some Q&A because that's the end of my spiel. Julie will tell us how long we have for this. If you have any questions, please feel free to either write them in the chat or raise your hand. I see Joanne has got a question there. We can start with you.
Go ahead, Joanne. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Rabbi, I love the meeting up of the lunar and the solar calendar as the kind of the ultimate crescendo of all the math that you did. And as I was reading the Parsha this week, all the numbers were just jumping off the page. And I was like, what's up with the numbers? And my sense was that Noach is kind of like a do-over of Breshit. And so we can't help ourselves but to be asking, oh, wait a second, is Hashem going to reinvent time? And, you know, I think the combination of the solar and the lunar is a sweet reminder that, yes, we still have dark and light as guiding posts. And now for my little question. In my Google, I saw that sometimes 40 can simply mean umpteen. So do you agree with that?
So really good question. So first of all, let me just say, I love that juxtaposition of Noah rebooting and sort of like a new Breshit here, right? That we're kind of got this new sense. And I think that reality of newness comes up a lot in Torah, right? We see that again in the book of Shemot. When we leave Egypt as slaves, God says, in order to start over, in order to begin anew, what are you going to do? You're going to create a calendar. That's the first thing, right? And so what is this juxtaposition of the light and the dark, the calendar, the timing, these numbers? Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Now, for your question of the number 40, the numbers in Torah pop off the page everywhere if we look for them, and I love that. And 40 is a recurring number, 40 years in the desert, 40 days on the flood. 7 is a recurring number, 7 of creation, all of these different pieces, even versions of 40, like 400 years in slavery, things of that nature. And our Kabbalists jump on this stuff. And our Kabbalists talk about adding meaning into these numbers. And the number 40, according to the Kabbalists, is a full cycle. It's a new start. It's something that starts over. So 40 days of a flood in order to re-enter into something new. We see this a lot in the books of prophets. With the kings, there was 40 years of peace after that king, and then 40 years of peace after that king. Where we get this idea of umpteen actually doesn't really come from our sages. It comes more from the scholars who want to take a more literary approach to Torah as opposed to a historical and spiritual approach. And what they say is that, what the scholars will say is, oh, look, this and the numbers work out. It's too nicely. It's too pretty. Everything's a 40. Get out of here. That's just a stand-in number for a big number, right? And so that's sort of that academic approach to literizing the text. I'm a pshat rabbi. I don't like to entertain I don't like to go down those roads. To me, every sort of form of what we'll call documentary hypothesis or biblical criticism or these sort of very literal literary pieces of Torah are so riddled with holes that to me, it's not worth my time. It's a midrash on Torah, and it's a valid midrash just like any other midrash on Torah. But I don't spend my time diving into that piece of Torah study. I'm a pshat rabbi. I like to look at what Torah says and say, what does that tell me? What's the lesson that tells me? If I need to change everything about the story in order to gain meaning out of it, did I really gain any meaning out of it? So I don't really look at 40 as an umpteen. I don't really look at 400 as random numbers. I look at these in a godly way, that if God is doing this, why shouldn't numbers be perfect? Right? And so I like to hold on to, I don't want to say a literal interpretation of the Torah, because obviously much of Torah is allegory, but I like to hold on to Torah as close to what it's actually saying as possible, and only when it absolutely must be allegory because the physics of the universe don't allow for it otherwise, do I start playing the game of, well, what may have actually happened, what might have been allegory. And that's how I like to approach Torah. And that's not to diminish how anybody else approaches Torah. That's just how I do it. Oh, somebody said 40 days to form a habit or break a habit. That's cool. I did not know that piece of information. Thank you for sharing that. Joel, I see you've got a question. Oh, you just muted, Joel. You unmuted and then remuted. There you go.
I mean, Noah was selected by God to perform this very important task because he was a righteous man. And they used a term in the Bible at Tibet, Doc. He was a righteous person. Yet, you don't see that word used again for Abraham, Isaac, Moses. Now, what made Noah so righteous?
Yeah.
What did he have that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob didn't have?
So I just want to double check. Do we really not see that word come up again for any of them? That's interesting.
It doesn't come up again.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very cool.
It's only what's in the Bible that it comes up, and it's with Noah.
Noah's. So the verse that Joel is referring to is that in chapter 6, verse 9, the very, very first verse of our parsha, it says, Ele toldot Noach. These are the generations of Noach. Noach, ish tzaddik tamim haya. Noah was a righteous and pure person, righteous and pure man. But then, Joel, I have to point something out. I have to point it out. I have to. Bidorotav, in his generation. So I agree with the question. What made Noah, in a world that is filled with wickedness, so much better than everyone else, that Noah, amongst everybody else, deserved salvation? At the same time, in his generation, was he more righteous than Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and all of these other people? Or was it that he was living in a more wicked time, and that by comparison, he was more righteous relative to everyone else in the land? I can't answer that question, right? I don't know that. So Job's not in Torah. So the one that just said Job was righteous, different section of text there. Somebody said Joseph was called righteous. We'd have to go back and look at this. But more than that is we also have to remember, and this is where I love pulling this in. I love when we get to look at Torah from a slightly different lens here, which is that Noah wasn't the only human on the ark. Noah was called a righteous man in his generation. That's true. And he was a descendant from that family line that God already has a relationship with. So was it that Noah himself did something that earned himself extra naches? Was it familial wealth? Was it generational wealth that he got righteousness from his ancestors and was just the beneficiary of that since God had already dealt with Adam and Eve? Or was it maybe that he surrounded himself with people that made him better, such as his wife and children and their wives?
So they're righteous.
Maybe.
The wife and children played a part in the righteousness that God was seeking.
I like to think that I'll just share with this group, I'm about to be a first-time father. And so I like to think that our children make us better people. And I'm hoping that as a father, I can live up to that and become a better version of myself in honor of my child who I'm about to bring into the world, God willing, sometime in the next couple of weeks. And I definitely can say as a married man that I am significantly a better person because of my wife. So any naches that I get as a teacher, as a person, as a rabbi, not that I get any, I mean, I might be terrible, but if I do get any, I definitely give a lot of the credit to those in my life, including my wife. So I would love to know the answer to your question as well, Joel. What did Noach do? And I'm sure there are some midrashim about it. I'd love to give some credit to those in his life, because I don't think any of us stand alone in the world. And I don't think our tradition suggests that we do either. Julie, I don't know where we are on timing. What do we got?
We have a few more minutes here, and I think we could maybe, let's see. There's 2 more comments or questions. You want to hear both of them and then do
there's actually 3, because I see that Bruce also, he doesn't have the hand raise button on, but he's physically raising his hand as well.
Okay.
So I do see 3 on the screen here.
Do you want to do all 3 quickly, and then
Yeah, let's do all 3 quickly.
time?
Why don't we take all 3 questions, and then I'll see what we can answer first. Bruce, it seemed like that might be were you going to comment on what was just said? Yeah, Bruce, why don't I call on you first? You're muted, Bruce. You got to hit the unmute button.
Unmute. Did I get it? Can you hear me?
There you go. Now we're good.
Great. I had a couple of questions actually, that pulled together much of what we were talking about. Is it true, at least according to Torah, that Noach built the boat in 7 days? He had 7 days notice to build the boat, no?
No, not necessarily. No, Moses, I keep doing that. Noah was told to build the boat earlier in the text. And then at some point later in the text, he said, you've got 7 days left.
Oh, okay. So
he didn't necessarily build it in 7 days.
All right. That leads to the next related question. Regardless of how long he may have had to build the boat, he couldn't possibly have done it himself. And he would have needed more help than just his sons and maybe even grandchildren could have provided, which indicates that there's possibly a lot more righteous people who worked with Noah to build this monstrous ship. And there's no word in the Torah that any of them were able to be saved, that all of those workers who sacrificed so much to build this huge ship were inundated in the flood, like all the wicked people. So there is a disparity there that maybe we can briefly discuss, if not resolve.
So listen, yeah, it seems incredible that somebody with the help of, at the very least, his family, could have built a boat like this. I'm not a master carpenter. I don't know enough about woodworking. I'm not a boat builder. I don't know enough about that process. What I can tell you, and I usually don't really bring this up because it's not a Jewish organization and I try to just rep the Jewish ones, but there is actually a family in, I think, Cincinnati or somewhere, not Cincinnati, I can't remember where. If you Google the Ark Encounter, there's a family that actually built one. There's a family that built a life-size Noah's Ark and turned it into a museum of the story of Noah. It's called the Ark Encounter. And I don't actually know what their building process was, but it would be interesting to find out how long it took them and what was used and how they did it. And I don't know, maybe it is possible that in a world of real craftsmanship, that Noach and his sons did it by themselves. Maybe they spent longer than we think. Maybe there was some influence from God or some other piece. We could kind of wrap around that. I think that what you're suggesting is a really difficult piece to bring into the text, which is that Noach used help to build something and then to let them on the boat. That certainly is not righteous behavior, I think, even in his time. So that's a hard pill for me to swallow personally. So I'm hoping that there are some carpenters and some boat smiths out there, I don't know what the word is for a person who builds a boat, who can shed some light into it, but maybe a question that we can all sit with. And next time when we come around to Parashat Noach, between now and then, I'll see if I can get more insight into how that process works and what may or may not have happened. A shipwright. Thank you, Robin. A shipwright. I am not a shipwright. Let's take Ginger and then Betsy, it says on the screen, and then we'll go from there.
Real quick questions. I think you already touched on that. The reason why Noach was picked to do the ark is because he was righteous in his own time. does that mean everybody else on the whole earth was evil? And why was Noah picked? I mean, everybody else, all this population, they were all evil, which I don't quite understand why he picked Noah. The other quick question is, you said something about Noah was up, he never went to sleep the whole time?
Oh, no, I didn't say
Is that
that.
what you said?
No.
Did you say that or no?
No.
Okay. And then were there more helpers as time went on, like more children or anybody else that kind of grew up and that could help Noah?
So we learn after the flood that Noah gets grandchildren. The only
Okay.
people who are mentioned the only human beings mentioned on the ark are Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. So presumably 8 human beings on the ark. We don't hear about any additional people until after the flood is over. So at least according to the Pshat of Torah, that's all the people that we have accounted for. In terms of Noah's righteousness, we just don't have enough time to go into the Midrashim on Noah's righteousness.
Good enough.
Sorry,
Thank
Rabbi
you.
Feivel, I accidentally muted you.
What was the last thing we heard?
Just like 5 seconds ago.
Oh, so I just said in terms of Noah's righteousness, we just don't have time to spend the hours and hours and hundreds of midrashim on Noah's righteousness. But it's a great question. Will hold us in suspense, learning for maybe next year.
All right,
Betsy,
and one more
last
from
question.
Betsy, yeah.
Okay, so this I picked this up a couple of years ago. I'll just throw it out that some people say that Noah is not somebody to be looked up to because he participated with God in destroying the world, and that he's not someone to admire. You just can't just take God's instructions or whatever. So I'll just throw that out as because I mean the message is good. We should never seek to destroy the world. I think our message now is more to prepare it. But I just, it's an interesting story, and they have all these, toys and stuff around Noah's Ark and stuff, and it's like, it's not really that great a message.
Yeah. So listen, the question that I'll tease out of that is, Rabbi, what do you think about that idea? And to that I can answer, which is that first and foremost, Noach does a lot more than just participate in the destruction of the world that is a negative. I mean, somebody wrote it in the chat earlier, Noach becomes a drunkard afterwards. I mean, he curses his own child afterwards. There's a lot more to this story than just the flood piece. And I don't think anywhere in our Torah does it suggest that Noah is someone to necessarily emulate, other than being righteous for your time. I think that's the one line that we kind of hold on to for Noach, is that in whatever world you live in, try to be at the top of the righteous game for the generation. But I think there's something else important implied in this notion that we oftentimes miss when we study Torah, which is that we want our forefathers, we want our ancestors to be perfect human beings. We want to look up to them and say they were blameless, they were perfect, they were wonderful, I should be like them. Why? I want to be better than them. I want to learn from their mistakes. I want them to teach us what we don't know so that we can move beyond what they didn't know. Torah is one element of Torah is a history book. And history is messy. It's ugly. It's horrifying at times. And that's really important. Abraham tried to sell his wife, not once, but twice. Isaac played favorites with his children. Jacob favored a son so badly that his other children sold him off to slavery as the better option for not killing him. These are not people who we should emulate every aspect of their life, but we should appreciate them. We should appreciate their struggles. We should learn the lessons that they have to teach us. We should learn from their mistakes. We should not assume that every single thing in Torah is there to give us warm and fuzzies. And if we can do that, if we can bring ourselves into that mode, not only will we build a more authentic relationship with Torah, more of the Torah that was meant to go to us, but we'll also be able to sit with Torah in a more real way and not have to play the games of making it all warm and fuzzy. And that's really important too. So if you take one thing away from today, only one thing from everything that's been said so far, I truly hope it's that calendars are awesome. So yeah, thank you all for learning with me. I really appreciate your time. I had fun. I hope you had fun. And if you enjoyed this, tell a friend. My Jewish Learning does this every week with other amazing rabbis. And you can contact me on my website, freelancejudaism.com, or Feivel at freelancejudaism. And I hope to hear from you and learn with you again in the future. Thank you, everyone.